Probably the best. There you go. Probably the best thing to do is to the cloud because it won't hog my computer's resources. Um, Thank you all for joining us. I hope wherever you are in the world that you're having a good day. As Aoife said there, it's a bright day. It's a fine, bright day here in Ireland. I thought we might be on um, uh, spotlight view where the speaker is. Anyway, it doesn't matter because I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and I hope this works. Give me one moment till I start playing the slideshow, and then I have to share the screen. So give me one moment while I do that. Again, apologies. And good evening if you're just joining us. We're just about to get started. Share screen. And what you should see momentarily is, okay, you should see a picture of the title slide. Now, the problem is that Aoife is still highlighted. Okay. Oh, I knew this would happen. I don't know how to do that. Highlight mode. Perhaps if somebody would be good enough to pop that into the chat, if any of you are familiar with how to spotlight the speaker rather than Aoife was speaking initially and she's still highlighted there. Let me just see if I can see the chat panel. Total nightmare. Oh, here we go. Chat is Alt H. Okay. Barbara Kling says, looks okay to me. Okay. You can see the slides. Can you see me inset into the slides? If that's okay, then we'll be okay. Grand. Okay. Right. We're grand, apparently. Right. Great. Okay. Good. Thank you. Right. We can get started. I do apologize. The technical, as I say, normally when I do a Zoom, I have somebody to assist me. And I said they're not available this evening. Now, this evening, we're going to explore astronomy and particularly summer solstice. But of course, we can't really do that without telling the story of the early astronomers of the Boyne Valley and indeed ancient Ireland, and what they might have done in terms of, showing an interest in the various sort of calendrical occurrences, which were both solar and lunar and indeed stellar. And we'll mention all of that during the course of the evening, but with a special focus on summer solstice. The journey, by necessity, I think, has to begin with the monument that you probably all know very well, hopefully. The one that I insist on calling by its ancient name, Sheedenbroga, or as it was later known, She Machanogue. And She Machanogue was the she of the young son, Angus. Angus was the son of Dagda, who was the chief deity of the Tuatha Dé Danann, and Bóinne. They were said to have had a love tryst in Newgrange, which was then known as the House of Alkmaar, but Alkmaar was later deposed from the place so that Angus could take it. In one version of the tale, it was Dagda who owned Newgrange, and Angus tricked him out of ownership, and that tale is the Gawal in Shida, the distribution of the She, or the otherworld mounds. Just make sure we're okay. Great. Right. And so we will progress. Newgrange, of course, just trying to get the slides to progress, and they're not doing that. Newgrange is part of a World Heritage Site inscribed in 1993 by UNESCO. You can see in that picture in the background up towards the left, you can also see the Great Mound of Nowth. There are three giant mounds or mega mounds, Newgrange, Sheedenbroga, Nowth and Dowth, which constitute the main monuments, but the entire complex has a lot more prehistoric monuments in it. Some of them are passage tombs, some are standing stones, henges, and other features. My story is that I became interested in astronomy at a very young age. In fact, I think I was around 7 when I first borrowed a book about astronomy from the local library. There you go. There's a plug for the library again, and immediately became absolutely mesmerized. My first view of the winter night sky was one crisp, cold, dark January night when Orion, the great hunter constellation, was visible. Due south of the house that I grew up in, and I could see it through the window, and I just marveled at it. And from then, I've been pursuing this hobby, but also in conjunction with the monuments. Because there I am standing at Newgrange under the stars, and many of you will know that Newgrange has a solstice alignment, but not the summer solstice. And there's a picture of Newgrange with the evening star, Venus, just sitting on top of it, and you can see some of the Milky Way stars there. Newgrange, we would have been aware of the fact that it was aligned on winter solstice from a young age. That alignment had been rediscovered by Professor Michael O'Kelly, who excavated the monument in the 60s and 70s. He became the first human being in probably since prehistoric times to witness the sun shining in there after the restoration and excavation of the monument. Now, here's a picture which was taken, I think it was taken in early June a couple of years ago. And it shows Newgrange with the sun behind it. And indeed, at this time of year, that's exactly what happens. So just to kind of set the scene in terms of the sun and its movement at this latitude, on Midsummer's Day, which is today, the sun actually rises in the northeast, which I'm pointing at here. At winter solstice, the sun rises in the southeast. The sunrises at the solstices are almost 90 degrees apart at this latitude. If you go as far north as the latitude of Edinburgh in Scotland, you have a 90-degree angle between them, a perfect 90-degree. So that is a lot of travel if you think about it, up and down the horizon. At this latitude, and of course more northerly latitudes, the sun is seen to travel a huge distance up and down the horizon. That has an enormous effect on the length of the day. And of course, that sort of expansion and contraction of the length of day results in the seasons, results in periods where there's great growth of the crops and the plants and the trees and everything, you know. And in the wintertime, of course, everything is seen to sort of die off and become cold and stale and barren. And this is something I think that would not have been lost on the prehistoric astronomers of the Neolithic, who, after all, we were told were farmers, and they were the ones who had introduced agriculture, sowing crops, and animal husbandry, the keeping of cattle for milk and for meat, etc. So, they I think would have been acutely aware of this seasonal change. Here's a picture taken in winter, I don't have a favorite season as such. All I can say is that I love the summer because I love the long days, the almost endless days of summer. This time of year, we don't get astronomical twilight. It doesn't end, at midsummer, and that's important to something we'll talk about in a little bit. At winter, though, as a photographer of these sites, sometimes we see hues and colors that we don't see in the summertime. There's something very dramatic about the colors. And that picture looks lovely and warm, but I can assure you when I was standing there taking it, my fingers were numb and the cold wind was blowing in my face. Anyway, briefly, I'll mention Dogda's Mound, the one you can see in the foreground of that photograph in front of Newgrange. That mound is called Mound B, or Tumulus B on the antiquarian or the old archaeological maps. But this is the one where Dogda was said to have gone after Aengus had dispossessed him of Newgrange. And you can see there in the foreground the River Bóinne. So Dogda's Mound is very close to the Bóinne but it doesn't have, of course, the magnificence of Siad Broga, which is the centerpiece of the whole complex, not just in archaeological terms, but in mythological terms too. We could argue that Louth has more art and is a larger monument, but we'll talk about that momentarily. And there's an aerial view of Dagda's Mound with the River Boyne on a foggy winter morning. And there's another view of it there. As I said, we'll be skipping rapidly through some of these. So I suppose most people who've heard of Newgrange are familiar with the phenomenon at winter solstice on the shortest days of the year, when at sunrise, the sun rises through an aperture or an opening, a slit, a feature that archaeologists refer to as the roof box, which is actually above the entrance. And the result of that is, I might just ask if you can see my mouse cursor as I'm moving it around. I'm not sure if you can see that. If somebody could indicate whether you can see that or not, it may be pointless for me to be moving it around if you're not able to see it. But anyway, the beam is actually split. You can see it. Brilliant. Great. Thank you for that. So the beam is actually split. You can see here that the sunlight entering through the roof box creates a separate sort of beam of light to the light that comes in through the entrance, which is the lower area of light. Now, this photo was taken maybe 5-10 minutes after the guests had re-emerged from witnessing the winter sunrise, the sunlight in the chamber. So this is when it's retreating again, when the sun has risen a bit more. Anyway, the effect of this is that one beam reaches the chamber and the other doesn't. So you walk in the door and you're walking in the light, but that light doesn't reach the chamber. It's the light above your head. As you walk up the passage of Newgrange is sloped, such that when you get to the chamber, you're actually at the same level as the roof box was above your head when you came in, which is a fascinating feat of architecture. They used the natural slope of the hill to create this effect. And there's another photo. I've been very lucky, I have to say, to have been present at so many winter solstices at Newgrange. It is 4.1 miles that way through that bookshelf as the crow flies. I can get there in between 10 and 15 minutes, depending on traffic. And I'm very lucky to live close by. Of course, it's been closed due to the pandemic. There have been no visitors in the Chamber of Newgrange since the spring of 2020. And no indication yet as to whether we'll get back in there for winter solstice coming. But we won't talk about the pandemic now because enough people are talking about it. And so here's a photograph that I was very lucky to take inside the chamber at sunrise on winter solstice in 2010. And that day we didn't have a full glorious sunrise. It was what we call in Ireland a watery sunrise, partially obscured by cloud. So remember, this is 6 months exactly. Well, yeah, 6 months. 21st of June to the 21st of December. So we're 6 months apart. We're 6 months after the last winter solstice and 6 months before the next one. And sure, look, you know, we were lucky that we were able to view it through the OPW live streams that took place last winter solstice, which was brilliant because it gave us an opportunity. Okay. The audio is breaking up, and you know what? The problem is there's absolutely nothing I can do about that mid-meeting because, I mean, literally, I have changed nothing here, and okay, it seems to be better now. I did move the microphone slightly. Hopefully that'll do it. We were lucky to be able to view the winter solstice remotely via the live streams. And, you know, given that 50 people get in on the solstice mornings, you know, the fact that thousands of people were able to view it around the world was brilliant. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think you guys did too, because we were watching last solstice. This is a model of what happens in the Chamber of Newgrange by Sean Doran. You should follow Sean on Twitter. Sean is very interested in space exploration and shares a lot of imagery of the planets. A real fabulous thing, you know. Anyway, we'll press on because we're talking quite a lot about winter solstice here. And of course, everybody in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, maybe there are some viewers from Australia or South America or South Africa who are thinking, yeah, this is right up our alley. We should talk about summer. Here's the sun rising over. The hill here is called Red Mountain. And look, you'll hear me. There's a lot of speculation in my work, because I believe that without speculating as to possibilities, then you can never consider possibilities. Is that an ancient name? Who knows? That the hill in the midwinter becomes crested with red, the glow, the pre-dawn glow, the aurora, the brachiolos, as it's called in Irish, the speckled light, the aurora of dawn. Now, a little known fact, and we'll get on to talking about summer solstice, we will. A little known fact is that Newgrange actually points towards this small mound, which is about 10 or 12 miles away. It's about 10 miles away. It's called Fornox. Now, Fornox was also part of a complex of monuments. It was excavated in the 1950s, the early 50s, by P.J. Hartnett. And Hartnett assumed, without the carbon dating evidence, but postulated based on the evidence, that it was built by the same people who built the Bóinne monuments. The Megalithic Art is similar. It was part of a cluster of monuments. There are several mounds and a number of henges in the area. I consider it sort of a mini Bóinne. And as you might have heard on one of our live streams during the past year, it has been identified as Luchar Alve in the mythology by a researcher, Kelly Kilpatrick, who says that it is Luchar Alva is the larger complex. Anyway, there's a plan of Fornox, and you can see that it kind of shares the same approximate design of Newgrange, as in it has a cruciform chamber. Actually, I haven't shown you the chamber of Newgrange yet, but we'll get to that. And this is very interesting. Newgrange points to Fornox. Fornox points to a place in the far north where the sun or the moon can never shine in there. And there's a picture taken in the chamber of Fornox. Fornox, like Newgrange, has been inaccessible to visitors for the past year and several months due to the pandemic. So here's a view on Google Earth when you're looking from behind Newgrange in the distance towards Fornox. I think there's a better version of it here, a higher version. That's the solstice line traced as far away as Fornox. And here's the sort of chamber of Fornox is much larger than the chamber of Newgrange, which is fascinating because the mound itself is much, much smaller than Newgrange. So at Newgrange, you have this massive cairn, this huge monument of approximately between 80 and 90 meters in diameter. Whereas at Fornox, you have a mound that is perhaps 15 or 20 meters in diameter, a quarter of the size, and yet the chamber floor area of Fornox is several times that of Newgrange. When you look out through the entrance, you're looking across a hill, the hill of Mullateelan. There's a barrow up there, what looks like a sort of a henge form type of monument. And if you continue that alignment further, you actually cross the Bjaltana standing stones very precisely. And this is interesting. So just bear in mind the following. Newgrange points to Fornox. Fornox points to the Bjaltana standing stones. At the Bjaltana standing stones, on the shortest days of the year, on the winter solstice, there is an alignment involving the larger of the stones, which looks a bit like a hand. And when you look along the sort of thin axis, you're looking at the islands of Rockabill off the coast of County Dublin, where on the winter solstice the sun rises out of the sea. In the Neolithic, it would have risen behind the islands. Today, it's a little bit to the right because of something called the obliquity of the ecliptic, this slight oscillation of the polar axis of the Earth, which causes the sun's maximum extremes, its solstice extremes, to actually oscillate. Sometimes they get closer and sometimes they get further apart. I think the oscillation is between something around 23 degrees and about 26 degrees. So at the moment, I think the Earth's axis is tilted by, is it 23.5 degrees off the plane of the solar system. So it's slightly tilted. Anyway, also at that time, Fornox would have been pointing at the rising place of the tail star, the bright star of Cygnus, called the one that's called Deneb, which is an Arabic word meaning the tail of the hen. Didn't intend to talk too much about Cygnus tonight, but just to say that there's lots of mythology at Newgrange involving swans, and indeed the Whooper Swans come there in the wintertime, and it's perhaps circumstantial. Again, this is in the realm of speculative work, postulation, but the passage and chamber of Newgrange are cross-shaped like the constellation Cygnus. Now, the question arises, did the ancient Irish monument builders know Cygnus as a swan constellation? We can't say. Cygnus is obviously a name that's borrowed from the classical world. This is a map of the passage and chamber of Newgrange with the beam of light coming in, and here's a 3D representation of it, again by Sean Doran, who masterfully recreated the monument. And you can see how the passage is sinuous, and it is these bends that actually, if you look at how wide the beam is and how it narrows, it is the turns or the curvature of the passage that narrow the beam as it enters the chamber. Originally it entered the end recess, probably hit the rear stone at the end of the end recess. Pardon me, while I admit some people, that doesn't happen today. And again, that's because of the obliquity of the ecliptic. Eventually, in several thousand years ahead, we won't be alive, thankfully, the sun will no longer shine into the chamber of Newgrange. But because this oscillation is periodic and basically comes back again, there will come a time in the future, I can't remember how many years it is in the future, it might be 20 or 30,000 years in the future, the sun will shine back into the chamber of Newgrange exactly as it did when the monument was built. Did the builders know this? I think they knew enough about astronomy, certainly, to detect the slow movement that we call precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth, which causes the stars, the sun's positions at the equinoxes and solstices among the zodiac constellations to slowly shift through the sky. So I think I perhaps have just waiting for the slide to progress, bamboozled you enough with the talk of Newgrange and winter solstice. Here is a picture of some of the Whooper Swans who arrive coincidentally into the Boyne Valley in October before Samhain and hang around there, ironically, because it's warmer in Ireland than it is in Iceland, which is where they come from, in very large numbers, sometimes as many as 20,000. And they disperse into the various wintering grounds around Ireland. And one of the major wintering grounds for the Whooper Swan is the Bóinne area, Newgrange, in this case, Newgrange Farm. And they depart again in February or March. It depends on seasonal variability. It depends, they reckon climate change is changing the migratory patterns of the birds. But anyway, at times in the 1980s, my good friend and co-author of Island of the Setting Sun, Richard Moore, Richard would have witnessed times in the 1980s when there were 100 or 150 birds in the fields in front of Newgrange, which is quite remarkable. Anyway, we are, for some reason, the slides are just a little bit slow to move on. The Milky Way seems to have also been important. Don't forget that the Irish phrase for the Milky Way is Bealach na Bóinne, or Bóthar na Bóinne, which means the way of the white cow, or the road of the white cow. And the river has the same name, Abhainn Bóinne. The Bóinne is from Bóinne, the goddess, who is also, you know, a white cow goddess with bovine attributes, and perhaps it was seen as the milk streaming from her. I have some suggestions as to what it means in my latest publication, which is the monograph about Bóinne, which is about to go to press this week. We'll say more about that at the end of the talk. And then there's the quartz at Newgrange. So Newgrange it's a little bit neat the way it's been restored, what the archaeologists are adamant about, and the evidence is quite convincing that the monument was originally faced with this white quartz mixed in with those sort of rounded cobbles that you see there protruding of granite and granodiorite, which were retrieved from the beaches of the Cooley Peninsula, you know, a distance of, by sea, a distance of perhaps 40 to 50 kilometers in each direction, which is fabulous. And it just shows us, I think, the distance and the lengths that the builders traveled to retrieve material for the construction. The great curbstones that you see there were brought from Clogherhead, and the quartz, they reckon, was brought from Wicklow. There's a map of the complex. So there's Newgrange there, and it's satellite mounds. There's Nowth, and Nowth has 18 satellite mounds, and there's Doubt there. There are several other features in the vicinity. Anyway, tracing this line backwards. So remembering what we said earlier on about the summer and winter solstices pretty much being opposite to each other. So if you're at Newgrange on the morning of winter solstice, you're looking towards Fornox, towards the sunrise. But likewise, if you stand at Fornox on the evening of summer solstice, so if any of you are in the vicinity, now you can't see Newgrange from Fornox, so it may not be worth it. There's an intervening hill. But if you're at Fornox on the evening of summer solstice, the sun will set in the direction of Newgrange. And if you continue that line into the distance, it strikes two other interesting features or monuments or monument complexes, Mount Fortescue and Slieve Bra. Mount Fortescue is a mound or a tumulus surrounded by what's called a hill fort. I don't think there's excavation, and I don't think there are dates for it. Hill forts, of course, would be considered to be Iron Age in date, but a lot of the hengiform and henge sites are earlier. They're late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, so who knows? And the age of the mound itself, which is squared off by a fence there to keep the cattle and the sheep off. It's listed on the National Monuments Service database there. And there's Slieve Bra, which is, you'll see some of the barrows. It's a Bronze Age barrow cemetery. I think there are between 30 and 40 known barrows on the hill of Slieve Bra. And again, if you're on Slieve Bra on the morning of winter solstice, you're looking towards Newgrange and Fornox, as we saw there. And conversely, if you're at Fornox on the evening of summer solstice, you're looking at Newgrange and Mount Fortescue and Slieve Bra. And there's the famous entrance stone at Newgrange, with its terrifically, magnificently inscribed spirals, which could relate to solar movement, because if you think about how the sun moves from winter to summer, you know, it's an arc in the sky. As it rises in the east and sets in the west, it forms a low arc in the sky. And as the year progresses, that arc gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So what you have is a series of arcs, nested arcs, we might call them, concentric arcs. But if you wanted to represent that movement from solstice to solstice in one symbol, the spiral would do it very, very aptly or neatly. You know, if you think about the growth of the sun from winter to summer and the decline of the sun from summer to winter, the clockwise and anti-clockwise spirals, basically you're basically completing the symbol, as it were. You're joining them. Instead of leaving them as separate arcs, you're joining them into one sweeping movement. And I mean, that's one suggestion as to what the spirals might mean. There are a million suggestions. And the guides at Newgrange, the OPW guides, know all about that, because every day somebody proposes a new theory, and sure, how can you prove it? Another thing about Newgrange that's interesting is stellar and planetary alignments. At the time it was built, in the era that Newgrange was built, Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, would have been visible from the floor of the chamber. And also there's a mention in Laura Gawala in the mythology that Ethna, who's another name for Bóinne, the deity, entered the house of Alkmaar, or entered Newgrange in the form of a dog. And I wonder whether that's a reference to the dog star. I also proposed in Island of the Setting Sun and elsewhere that one interpretation of the spirals might be, you know, father, mother and child, Dagda, Bóinne and Angus, or in the later mythology of the Táin, you have Lugh and Dechtana and Setanta. Setanta later became Cuchulainn, but he was effectively conceived at Newgrange, which is fascinating. Another suggestion, sun, moon and morning star, because all three were seen to be able to shine in there. In fact, Joseph Campbell, in the 50s, before the excavation and restoration of Newgrange, recorded a story. I don't know whether he recorded it personally in the area or whether he had read it somewhere, that once every 8 years the morning star shines into Newgrange, and astronomically that is factual, because Venus does in fact follow an 8-year cycle in which it goes through 5 synodic periods. So it repeats itself once every 8 years. Yes, indeed, you could probably see the light of Venus. It's said that Venus can cast a shadow if it's far enough from the sun that it's able to shine into Newgrange in darkness before the sort of dawn light appears. Then it would be possible. Kerbstone 67 is one of the 3 very heavily decorated stones at Newgrange. Fascinatingly, this one, according to the OPW guides, receives the light of the sun on the dawn of summer solstice. So this morning, and of course for several mornings either side, the sun rises and casts light on this stone from an acute angle in such a way as to really accentuate the carvings in a way that I've tried to replicate here with flash photography or torchlight, which is the way I like to paint the stones with light to accentuate the carvings on them. And then the other really, really beautifully decorated stone is exactly opposite the entrance stone. So on the opposite side of the monument to this one, that's Kerbstone number 1, Kerbstone 67. This is Kerbstone 52 with panels of artwork. I've suggested here that there's a possibility the 3 cup marks in the cartouches on the right-hand side might represent the belt stars of Orion pointing to Sirius, as Sirius was seen to align with the passage and the axis of the site. That's a suggestion, again, speculative, and I think that in the absence of finding some manual as to why the monuments were constructed by the people who built them, then we will always be in the realm of speculation. And there's a photograph taken on the morning of winter solstice as the first of the visitors arrived there. And again, as I said, I've been lucky to have been there at twilight and in darkness on several occasions. And there's Kerbstone 52 again. And there's Kerbstone 52 with Venus sitting just over the monument. And again, this is at winter solstice. You can see me there in the corner trying not to allow my torch to be seen in the photograph. How are we doing for time? Okay, better skip on because we still have to talk about summer solstice. And on that morning, Venus was indeed visible in the roof box of Newgrange and photographed by one of the guides there. However, possibly not visible from the chamber, but certainly visible from the passage. Okay, just trying to move things on here again. There's Kerbstone 67. Again, that's Venus there sitting above the mound. And we'll progress now because I want to move on. And there's another picture. And again, that's Venus. I was messing around with my torch, trying to create an interesting picture. That's Newgrange taken from the western side, the unexcavated side. Part of it is unexcavated. And again, so on the morning of summer solstice, the sun would rise in this area and cast its light beautifully onto Kerbstone 67. The concrete shelf you see above it is a modern addition, not built by the Neolithic farmers, but rather built by modern engineers and archaeologists to prevent water damage to the stones. Quite a practical function. And there we go. There's Newgrange. Then as we sort of move off from Newgrange, we're moving east towards Douth, which we'll talk about, but I think we're going to go to Nowth first. Indeed, Nowth, excavated beginning in 1962, the same year the excavations began at Newgrange. The excavations at Nowth lasted for 4 decades. It sits on a promontory of land overlooking the bend of the Bóinne. So you probably can't see it in this picture, but the land here at this edge falls precipitously away down onto the river. And so this was used strategically by much later dwellers of the area. The early medieval kings of northern Brega had their headquarters at Nowth and fortified the monument. And of course would have been able to keep a good eye on people approaching, whether by land or by river, given its situation, as I said earlier, surrounded by 18 satellite mounts. Knokbua or Knoguba, the 2 supposed or proposed names for it according to the mythology in the Dinshanicus. Nowth is interesting because it has 2 passageways, but they face, rather than facing the solstices, they face roughly east and west. And for a long time, it has been suggested that that was for the equinoxes, but it's not precisely aligned on equinoxes at all. It's more complex than that, and it involves the moon. Here is a view along the eastern passage of Nowth, which is much longer than the passage of Newgrange, and is in fact the longest Neolithic chambered cairn passage known in Ireland. If not in Europe. I couldn't stake my reputation on that claim, but certainly the longest one in Ireland. And it leads to a cruciform passage, which at one time would have accepted the sunlight at dawn. So very interesting. Nowth is particularly fabulous for its megalithic art. Some of it, you could say, you look at it and you say, there's astronomy there. what I saw in this image was what looked like a representation of the arc of the Milky Way, something like the goddess Nut, or Nut, as she is represented in Egyptian art, and mirrored also on the earth in the bend of the Boyne. The Boyne of the sky is the Milky Way, the Boyne of the earth is the river. Sunrises, perhaps also circumpolar stars, or the movement of stars around the pole in the northern region of the sky. It's all speculative, of course. Giant spirals, Kerbstone 5 with its beautiful huge spiral and other symbols. And of course, the very famous Kerbstone 52, which is known more popularly as the calendar stone, which may represent attempts to correlate the lunar year with the solar year, because if you count the number of full moons in a year, when you get to 12, you're short of a solar year by 11 days. And the reconciliation of the solar and lunar calendars happens with what's called the golden number, or the Metonic Cycle. So called because a 5th century Greek astronomer called Meton was said to have discovered it. But in fact, here it is, we think, or we propose, carved into stone at Louth around 3,500 BC. So at least 2,500 years before Meton was ever born. The attempt to correlate the sequences. So you basically keep counting full moons, and when you count 12, you're short of a solar year by 11 days. Then you count 24 for 2 years, and you're short 22 days. And it means that the 3rd year, you have to add an extra moon, a 13th moon, the baker's dozen, 12s and 13s. Anyway, that's a bit complex, and that's more than we want to sort of gobble up tonight. A view from the top of Louth towards the west. That's the hill of Slane in the distance. That was taken just before the monument closed for the winter at Samhain. And there's an aerial view. This feature here, a timber, a henge, a small timber 4-poster monument. The 4 posts in the middle, surrounded by a circle with an opening to the east, mimicking, it would seem, the Eastern Passage, of which the entrance is here with the white quartz on the ground. Difference between Louth and Newgrange in terms of the quartz is the archaeologists are fairly satisfied that the quartz at Louth was on the ground, whereas the quartz at Newgrange was up on the wall. Go figure, different monuments perhaps built by different members of the community. The third, and I should say probably the first, because the archaeologists believe Louth was the first to have been constructed, is the Great Monument of Louth. The crater in the top of it was the result of disastrous vandalism in the form of excavation by antiquarian treasure hunters at the time of the Great Famine, who did a lot of damage. They dug a trench in from the side of the to find gold, but they didn't know back then that there was no gold in the Stone Age, and they were unlikely to find it. You can see some of the Kerbstones protruding from the ground here. Just want to say, I haven't seen any chat in ages, just to reassure me that everything is working okay. Perhaps somebody might indicate in the chat if the sound is okay and if the view is okay. All good, great. Okay, thank you. I just hadn't seen any chat in ages, and I was wondering if I was perhaps talking to myself, since you wouldn't be the first time, Anthony, you know. So we'll move on. Louth is important. And the reason is that Louth, in the Dunshanicus, there's a myth which I think is a summer solstice myth. It speaks about a king, Bresal Bodibad, who commands all the men of Ireland, doesn't mention the women, commands all the men of Ireland to come here and build a tower from which you can pass to heaven. Now, it mentions the Tower of Babylon, or the Tower of Nimrod, and no doubt that is the medieval ecclesiastical scribes' attempt to sort of reconcile what is a pre-Christian pagan myth with their biblical and Christian worldview. But in order to do this, the men asked for endless day, and the king's sister cast a spell on the sun to make it stand still in the sky, so that there would be endless day for this task. Fascinatingly, I think this refers to summer solstice. At this time of year, astronomical twilight does not end. This, in simple terms, what that means is the sun doesn't sink far enough below the horizon for full darkness to come. And so what you'll find is actually at this time of year, in the middle of the night, and myself and Richard Moore have been at Douth, well, especially when we were researching for Island of the Setting Sun, we were at Douth at midnight and 1 a.m. and there was more than enough light for you to be able to see what you were doing. In other words, if you wanted to build through the night, you could do that. Anyway, things came to a sudden end when lust seized the king, and he went in unto his sister, and the spell was broken. And a sudden darkness came upon the place, and the men said, well, we were promised endless day for this task, and because night has come and day is gone, we are departing, and forevermore this place shall be known as Dua, or darkness. And of course, Douth is an anglicised version of its old name, Dua, D-U-B-A-D, or with Lenishan Dua, meaning darkness. And I think it's an account of a total eclipse of the sun that takes place in conjunction with summer solstice. The standing still sun, of course, is the standing still of the sun on the horizon. If you're watching the sun's movement up and down the horizon in the morning and in the evening, you will see that at the time of the solstices, it suddenly starts coming to a stop, or suddenly starts coming. It doesn't, yes, sorry, that was an oxymoron. It gradually comes to a stop and rises in the same place for several days before starting to move back down along the horizon. And that is standing still of the sun. Sol Sistere, the standing still sun, in Irish, Grianstad, which literally means stopped sun. Here's the stone of the seven suns, which may represent carvings or depictions of a total eclipse of the sun. And this, ironically, view is captured on the morning of winter solstice. So although this sun this stone, should I say, faces, if you put your back to it, you're looking approximately towards the place where the sun would rise on summer solstice. This photo, you can see the sun is at a very acute angle here. That was taken on winter solstice. So on the mornings of winter solstice, the stone gets lit magnificently, providing it's a clear day. And in Ireland, no such thing is ever guaranteed. You can travel all the way around the world as a lottery winner to view the winter solstice sunrise in the chamber of Newgrange, but the one thing you're not guaranteed is sunlight, because in Ireland, it's a mixed bag. The weather's a little bit capricious here, should we say. And here's a view of the Seven Suns stone taken at nighttime with a torchlight. So I'll just show you the suns. There's five in a line. 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's one here which doesn't have the ring around it. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Didn't mean to do that. There's one here beneath the row, and then there's one here above, again, without the circle around it. One of the many suggestions and interpretations of this stone is that it relates to an eclipse, which ties in with the mythology. Here's the southern chamber, which this gate, notwithstanding the pandemic, every year on the afternoon of the shortest day of the year of the winter solstice, this gate is opened by OPW staff, and people are allowed to come in and have a look, stand in the chamber. I've been there on a few occasions, and it's fantastic. So Douth has a winter solstice alignment. Even though the mythology speaks of summer, it is possible that eventually, on complete exploration or archaeological investigation of the site, we may find a passage and chamber on the opposite side of the monument aligned towards summer sunrise, or even on the northwestern side of the monument facing summer solstice sunset. Who knows? Again, we're dealing in the realm of speculation. And somewhat aptly, perhaps, there's a lunar eclipse in conjunction with Douth. What time on? I better move on. I'm talking too much. Close to Douth is the Great Deathhenge, ingloriously called Site Q in the archaeological maps. And myself and Richard Moore witnessed this in the year 2000. There's a picture Richard took of me while we were observing in the year 2000, that the two gaps in the monument, the southwestern entrance and the northeastern, line up towards the place where the sun rises on summer solstice. That henge, I should tell you, is on private land and is inaccessible. Don't please access monuments without permission. I grabbed these today from the wonderful video by the National Monument Service of a small passage tomb called Site T, which is not far from Douth. It's north of Douth by about half a mile. in the Bóinne complex, which is a very short passage, an undifferentiated passage and chamber pointing towards the place where the sun rises on summer solstice. And there's a picture of the sun rising pictured from the chamber of our own cairn tea, because you'll be familiar with cairn tea at Loughcrew, which is in the next picture. That's this one here, which has an alignment on the equinox. Well, we have our own cairn tea at Bóinne, and it's aligned on summer solstice sunrise, but you have to be up very early in the morning, because at this time of year, at this latitude, the sun rises at about 4:50 a.m. and it doesn't set until about 9:50 p.m. And as you go to the north coast of Ireland and beyond, earlier and later again. Cairn Tea and Loughcrew, known more for the equinoxes and the cross-quarter days. So, for instance, there's just some general views. I'm skipping on because I'm conscious of time. And I still have a lot of slides to show, so I'm going to zip through some of these. Cairn Tea again is closed due to subsidence, but when it was open up until 2018, many of you, I hope, would have been in there at the equinoxes and watched the sun shining in there, as I show in this photograph, illuminating those beautiful carvings at the end of the rear recess, some of which appear to be solar or stellar emblems, but that's subjective. You know, ask a child or somebody to draw a sun or draw a star, and you will see megalithic art in those drawings. That doesn't mean that's what the megalithic art means. There are lots of explanations or theories about it. Here is Cairn L, where at the beginning and the end of winter, at Samhain and Imbolc, the cross-quarter days in, early November, and early February, the sun shines in, and just before winter begins, it shines onto this slender pillar, and the reflected light spills onto a stone in the chamber there. As it rises out of a ruined cairn on the hill of Carrickbrack, which is also known as Sliabh Rua, which is Red Mountain. Interesting that that name should be found in the Boyne Valley and at Loughcrew. So they're watching the sun at winter solstice and summer solstice, but also those critical times in between. Cairn S, which has an alignment towards the sunset at the beginning of summer and the end of summer. So basically what we would call Bjaltana in early May, the cross-quarter date, when the sun's rapid march up the horizon begins to slow down towards summer solstice. And then again, as it comes back after summer solstice in August, at the beginning of the harvest festival at Lunasa. And here's another picture of the passage of Cairn S looking out towards the sunset. Cairn U has an alignment towards sunrises, again the same as Cairn L, which was the one we saw, this one. Cairn U, which is on the eastern hill, Sliabh na Caille. Cairn L is on Cairn Ban, which is the western hill. There are 4 hills in total, but the two with the major conglomerations of monuments are Sliabh na Caille and Cairn Bóinne. The white cairns is what it means, because they were once covered in white quartz. And here's the sunrise that was taken at Imbolc. That was taken in early February. And there's a zoom in, because through the view you'll be able to see the clump of trees there, which is the Hill of Tara. It's actually aligned approximately on the Hill of Tara for summer sunrise. At the Hill of Tara, you have the oldest monument on the complex is Dóin O'Neill, the Mound of the Hostages, which again has a short, undifferentiated passage which points towards the sunrises, the same sunrises as this Cairn U at Loughcrew, at the beginning of winter at Samhain and the beginning of spring at Imbolc. And there's a view of Dóin O'Neill under a very, very angry looking sky. There's an OPW photograph from inside the passage of the Mound of the Hostages, showing some of the megalithic art, which looks more like rock art. And there's myself standing on top of Dóin O'Neill, looking at the sunset, which sets into the Loughcrew hills in the opposite direction, which would be the beginning of summer and the end of summer at Bjaltana and at Lunasa. And there's a picture of the sun setting into Loughcrew, pictured from the Hill of Tara. You can see this is Cairn T on Sliabh na Caille, and the large mounds here in this picture would be Cairn D, which is the largest existing monument in the Loughcrew complex, and Cairn L on Cairnban, or Cairnban West if you prefer. Some photos from inside Cairn T before it was closed off, showing some of the megalithic art. It's an excessively richly adorned monument inside. Again, some of it looks more like rock art than megalithic art. And again, this is all closed. That gate doesn't get opened anymore because there's been some subsidence, and this lintel stone here has cracked. So you're not allowed in at the moment. Hopefully they'll rectify that. And here's a photo I took a few years back of the so-called Equinox Stone at the end recess of Cairn T, which is, as I say, beautifully illuminated on the mornings of the spring and autumn equinoxes. And if you sit in that recess and look up, you see this gloriously, beautifully decorated ceiling. And again, there are symbols here that you could say, are they suns or are they stars, or what are they? They certainly look astronomical, don't they? But just because they look astronomical, of course, doesn't mean they are. We will leave Loughcrew. Very briefly, we'll mention the Hill of Slane. The moat on the Hill of Slane is said to be the burial mound of King Slánne, a Fir Bullock or Fir Vulloch king. And it has an equinox alignment with the Mill Mount in Drogheda, which is said to be the burial place of Amergin, the Milesian bard, but previous to Amergin, said to have been the burial place of the wife of Angawa, or the Gubán Sair. The smith's wife was said to be in local folklore buried at Mill Mount, but the two are aligned approximately on the equinoxes. Mill Mount is very well known today because in 1808, the British Army, which had its base there, decided to put extra fortifications in, including the Martello Tower, at the height of the Napoleonic Wars, to keep a watch out because they thought maybe Napoleon would invade. He didn't eventually, thankfully. But the mound that supports the Martello Tower and the cannons and the fortified wall, this mound is now reckoned to be a prehistoric burial mound of unknown date. And that's the approximate alignment from Millmount through Slane, Hill of Mail, in I think that's in County Westmeath, Rathcrohan, as far as Croagh-Patrick, and the alignment, as you can trace it on Google Earth, is very precise. Does that mean it was intentionally set down in prehistory? We may never be able to tell. And there is a suitably admonishing St. Patrick at the Hill of Tara, basically letting you know that you may be visiting here, this pagan site, but you have to pass me first, and I'm going to Christianize it. You may be familiar with this great stone at Ishnak in the centre of Ireland in County Westmeath, the navel of Ireland, the Omphalos, Umbilicus Hiberniae, the cat stone, or the stone of divisions, Isle Namirin, which is said to mark the point where the four ancient provinces of Ireland met, and the fifth province was represented by the stone itself. And just to give you an idea how big it is, I think it weighs something like 30 tons and is about 15 feet, 16 feet tall. There's a picture with muggins in it. Talk about ruining a picture, I know. You'll be interested, I hope, in the fact that the Bjaltana Fire Festival at Ishnak, which was documented in the medieval manuscripts, has actually been recently reinstituted. And for the past decade or so, they've held this wonderful pageant and the lighting of the fire at dusk at Bjaltana, marking the beginning of summer. And something that I should mention, absolutely in relation to that, is that there is a very precise solstice alignment from the Stone of Divisions, or from Ishnak, looking through Cairn T at Loughcrew, the aforementioned Cairn T with its equinox alignments, towards the Calibera's house on Slieve Gullion, which is another passage to him. And this is fascinating because it's extremely precise. From Ishnak, you're looking at Cairn T and Slieve Gullion on the morning of summer solstice. So a viewer on the peak of the hill of Ishnak this morning, or tomorrow, or in the next few days, looking at the sunrise, will be looking directly towards Loughcrew and Slieve Gullion. The passage tomb or chambered cairn at Slieve Gullion also has a beautiful alignment, captured wonderfully by my good friend Ken Williams in this photograph of winter solstice sunset. You're looking out through the passage there, and as the sun goes down on the shortest day of the year, you're looking at Loughcrew and at Ishnak. And again, conversely, on summer solstice from Ishnak, you're looking towards Loughcrew and Slieve Gullion. And here we go, just to show you how precise it is using Google Earth. The Calibera's house, or Calivera's house, precisely through Cairntee at Loughcrew to the Stone of Divisions, Island of Mirren. The total distance of that alignment is almost 64 miles, or 103 kilometers. Go figure. Is that intentional, or was that completely accidental? Given that the passage of Calivera's house points towards Loughcrew and Ishnak, I doubt very much that it's accidental. So even here at the centre of Ireland, where there isn't that monumental architecture that you get with Newgrange and Louth and even the cairns of Loughcrew, you don't get, although there are the remains of at least one passage tomb on the summit of Ishnak, and possibly more, and we don't know the orientation of those at the moment. There's nothing that says, look in this direction, look in this direction, look in this direction. But of course, the folklore and the mythology of Ishnak suggests that you actually look in all directions, that, you know, Ishnak had a view towards all provinces and all astronomical events in each direction. And usually there are alignments with those. That was demonstrated in that slide I showed you earlier, which is from Michael Dames's book, Mythic Ireland, also republished as Ireland, A Sacred Journey, in which he chronicled several long distance alignments from Ishnak towards various astronomical events of the year. But as I said, that one in particular I studied towards Sliabh na Caille and Sliabh Gullion is extremely precise. Anyway, we are nearly finished. You'll be glad to hear, because we've just come up on the hour now and I want to leave time for questions. What happens if you were able to suddenly darken the sun today in the middle of the day, if there was a total eclipse and the stars came out? This is what you would see. You would see the giant constellation of Orion basically carrying the sun like an Olympic torchbearer, bearing it from rising to setting on the longest day of the year. This is an event that is peculiar to our time, because the sun's position at summer solstice, look, its position on any day of the year is gradually regressing westwards through the zodiac. So, you know, in the Neolithic, the summer solstice sun was in the constellation of Leo, and it has now moved to between the feet of Gemini and the horns of Taurus. Orion is not considered a zodiac constellation, but there are this couple of days of the year where it passes over him and he's kind of seen to hold on to it. But peculiarly, if you go back to the Bronze Age, the date given for the arrival of the Milesians was on the day of Bjaltana in 1700 BC. And if you go back in time, you will find that at that moment, the sun was in the hand of Orion in the Bronze Age. And again, because the sun's movement at any particular day of the year is slowly regressing due to precession of the equinoxes, it takes 25,920 years to complete a cycle. So in the next, say, 50 to 100 years, the sun will slowly drift out of the hand of Orion on summer solstice. And we won't see it. Well, we won't see it because we'll be long gone. But we won't see that returning, as in humans will not see the return of the sun to Orion on the longest day of the year. We can't see it anyway, because in the middle of the day, you can't see the stars. But that doesn't mean you can't know it, because the sun, remember, the full moon is always opposite the sun and you can work these things out. But fascinatingly, that won't return for almost 26,000 years into the future. And lastly, I thought, when we're on the theme of astronomy, that some of you will have seen this photo of the wonderful comet Neowise, which made a spectacular appearance in early July last year in the northern part of the sky, and positioned itself beautifully over the entrance of Newgrange. This photograph was taken at about 1:30 in the morning, and the mist just descended for a moment, creating this ethereal scene. Anyway, it's something that I enjoy doing, as many of you will know, is watching the stars and the sunrises and the sunsets and the waxing and waning of the moon and the eclipses and the appearance of comets and the meteor showers and the noctilucent clouds that we see at this time of the year, and the aurora borealis, which we're sometimes lucky to see. And I marvel at them all. I just think that if you were living 5,000 years ago, when there was no light pollution, when there was no atmospheric pollution, you could see the stars wonderfully, starkly. you know, wonderfully, brilliantly. And I think this impressed them greatly. Those of you who are not familiar, I know there are familiar faces on tonight, but there are also people here who may not be regular participants in Mythical Ireland live streams. If you want to read more or find out more, the website is mythicalireland.com. We're on Facebook, on facebook.com/Mythical Ireland. Also look for the Mythical Ireland community where you can interact. Instagram, Flickr, YouTube. The YouTube channel has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of videos, including this one, which I hope will be uploaded later on. And don't forget, if you want to support Mythical Ireland, there are two or three major ways that you can do that. One is to become a patron of Mythical Ireland at patreon.com/Mythical Ireland, patreon.com/Mythical Ireland. You pledge a monthly amount and you get rewarded for that with early access to pictures and news updates and blog posts and podcasts and videos. And the other way you can support Mythical Ireland is to buy my published work. And I'm delighted to announce that the second in the Mythical Ireland monograph series, which is about Bóinne, the goddess of the River Boyne and the Milky Way, is on the verge of going to print. It will go to print hopefully in the next 7 days, all going well. By this day next week, it will be hopefully with the printer. The first in the series was Finn and the Salmon of Knowledge, Mythology, Toponymy, and Cosmology. And as I say, the second in the series is Bóinne. If you want to buy it, just go to the website and go to the gallery and shop and go into the books section and you'll see it in there. And I would be delighted if you could do that. It will be, all going well, the third publication from Mythical Ireland this year, following, as I say, the first monograph and Return to Segish, which is my first hardback book, which I hope you will also enjoy. In the meantime, thank you for participating, and I'm going to see if there are any questions. So if anybody would like to ask a question, I'll maybe allow 3 or 4 questions if that's all right. A lot of people saying thank you. Delighted to be able to share all that with you. I know it was a whirlwind tour. You know, I mean, we're literally, I could talk for 3 hours just about, for instance, the mythology of the deities and their control of Newgrange. I could talk for hours about Loughcrew. I could talk for hours about Louth. But anyway, if anybody would like to ask a question, please just indicate in the chat. Let me see if I can stop sharing the screen. Should be able to do that. I apologize. But I suppose it's better that you're looking at a lovely picture of Newgrange than looking at my mug shot. Okay, let me just, yes. Okay, let me just do that. Okay. Ah, there's Tom King is in his forging away as he always does. Who else? Nuala Doyle is there. Stephen O'Hara is in the house. Hey, you, Tom. Sheila Gunn is there. Sheila Moylan is there. I see some familiar faces. Anne McCallum. Paul Campbell is in the house. Loads of people whose name I don't recognize. If you're not familiar with the live streams, we generally do a weekly live stream on Mondays. I haven't done it for the past 2 weeks, but that's because I've been exceptionally busy getting the Bóinne monograph. Where would you recommend witnessing the sunset tonight? Oh, that's a good question. Summer sunset, Fornox. I mean, it's nice to be at Newgrange or Louth watching the sunset. I mean, you mightn't be able to see it setting over a particular monument. You can't access Ishnak outside of ours. The Hill of Tara would be a brilliant place to go and watch the sunset this evening. When I was in Ireland in 2013, I couldn't find a tour that took in Newgrange, Louth and Louth. Are there tours like that now? Well, as it happens, Jeanette, who asks the question, I do tours, haven't been doing them during the pandemic. I suspect things will be opening up very soon because a lot of us are now either fully vaccinated or part vaccinated. The case numbers are going down and the number of infections involving people who are vaccinated have plummeted. So I suspect things will open up. A question, says Declan, Ishnak is a place that is very dear to me. The owner told me many years ago that it was the residence of the High Kings. Is this so, Anthony? I think there are one or two mentions of kings in relation to Ishnak. I mean, you would normally associate the Hill of Tara as being the principal sort of ruling place of the High Kings. But remember that in medieval Ireland, the country was divided into many, many smaller provinces and kingdoms. There never really was an over king who commanded all of the individual provinces. Certainly Ishnak was probably a royal site. In the mythology, it's referred to in conjunction with Tara. Ishnak and Tara are referred to in the mythology as two kidneys in a beast. In other words, they kind of have the same mythology about them. They are seen to be cosmologically the center of something. At Tara, for instance, at the time St. Patrick arrived, only the king could first light the sacred fire at Tara, and then other people could light their fires. And we have the same at Ishnak, where the Ishnak fire had to be lit first and then the surrounding fires. In terms of high kings ruling at Ishnak, I'm not so sure. I recommend the work of Rosemary. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I think it's S-C-H-O-T-T. Is it Schott or Scott? There are at least one or two downloadable papers on the internet by this lady, and a wonderful overview of the archaeology and the mythological significance of Ishnak. And also, in case you're interested in sort of pursuing it further, this one is very good. Celtic Heritage by Rhys and Rhys Alwyn and Brinley Rhys, Ancient Tradition in Ireland and Wales. Talks a lot about the cosmological layout of the monuments, so you may be interested in that one. Any other? Jeanette is running okay. Roseanne shot, says Mary McKenna. Thank you, Mary, not Rosemary shot. Roseanne, thank you. Anthony, is the Proleek dolmen? Oh yeah, Sinead Roach is asking a very interesting question. Is the Proleek dolmen, which I didn't feature a photograph of, there was 133 slides, by the way. Yes, I believe that if you sort of put yourself inside the wedge of Proleek tomb, now you can't see it now because of trees and hedges. I believe that on the summer solstice in the evening time, the sun sets into Slieve Gullion when you're situated looking out of that wedge, as it were, of Proleek. Actually, it's one really that I should take the drone to, fly the drone up in the air to get a picture of the sun and the Proleek dolmen. Great question, and thank you for that. Do you know what family ruled Oriel from Loughcrew, says Emma? I don't, is the short answer. I apologize on that front. Lar Dooley, I suspect, who lives over there, will know a lot more. Kath is asking to say more about the Boyne monograph. Well, perhaps just very briefly, what I should do is just read what is the summary of it contained. Sorry, I apologize. I'll do this very quickly. I'll just read. It's a summary paragraph which is featured on the book of the monograph, which kind of summarizes what's in there, and maybe that will give you a good overview of what's in it. Bóinne is well known as the deity who gave her name to the River Boyne, one of Ireland's most illustrious rivers in mythology and history. Her renown stems mainly from two circumstances: that she had an affair with the Dagda at Newgrange and bore a son, Aengus Og, and that she drowned after approaching the mysterious well of her husband Nectan. However, Bóinne's story, compiled and presented in this work from all the known manuscript sources about her, suggests that she was a primordial deity, and that the source of the eruption of the well and the resulting dismemberment of Bóinne as the river formed from the ensuing waters is, in fact, a very ancient creation myth. Her name is also given to the Milky Way, the heavenly Boyne River, which is known in Ireland as Ballach na Bófinne, the Way of the White Cow. There may have been an effort to portray Bóinne as an Irish equivalent of the biblical Eve, and her supposed shame or sin after her affair with the Dagda may be elements that were accentuated or even wholly contrived by the ecclesiastical scribes of the Middle Ages who wrote her story down. This monograph is an attempt to disentangle the various narratives about Bóinne and to present a full and untainted account of the mythology about her. So I hope that answers your question. So brilliant. All that remains for me to do is, I think we'll do what we normally do at this time and unmute everybody and every. Oh, sorry, there's somebody in the waiting room that I didn't see. How do I unmute all? Ask all to unmute. There you go.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you,
Good
Anthony.
evening,
all. Good morning, all.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anthony.
Anthony.
Happy summer solstice, everybody.
Happy summer
Happy summer solstice.
Brilliant indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Your days be
Thanks,
long,
Anthony.
bright and
Awesome
full.
as ever.
Oh, lovely.
Sheila, you're very welcome. And I will stop recording now.
Good night.